So to start off, I'd like to get a sense of, what it is that you do at Rockefeller as the Senior VP in Asset Services, and what does sort of the work look like that you do on a day-to-day?
Julian, good morning. Great to see you again and great to be part of this. So I am head of Asset Services for Core Holdings, which are our buildings at 1221 Avenue of the Americas, 1271 Avenue of the Americas, and 745 7th. It's about 5.5 million square feet with a roster of Class A tenants. We have about 40 tenants across the portfolio, a daily population of about 20,000 people plus visitors. So my team provides all the building services, property management, engineering operations, security, cleaning, everything it takes to operate a Class A asset.
Right, that's definitely a huge undertaking, sounds like. And thinking about when you first started your career, I know you've sort of worn different hats across different companies. Can you give us a sense of what you studied in school and how it relates to what you do today, and if it's what you thought you'd be doing?
So I think the simple answer is yes, but no. And what do I mean by that? I studied civil engineering at Lafayette College, a concentration in structures and land use, land planning. And I early on developed an interest in general building. Through my internships as an undergraduate, I realized after a couple of summers with the Department of Transportation that heavy civil and infrastructure really was not my thing. And my focus would be on general building. I was fortunate enough to get a job with Turner Construction in New York City right out of college. And my first project was a high-rise building on Fifth Avenue. So that was right in line with where I thought my career was going. I spent many, many years in the commercial building sector. I moved from pure construction into real estate development. And then as my career progressed, I intentionally tried to branch into other market segments. So I got residential experience, land development, light industrial, healthcare. That led to opportunities in the real estate owner and operating environment. So from development to operations. That led to a number of opportunities over the years, but that included facilities management, an expansion of responsibilities into facilities management and real estate transactions. So I'm considered somewhat of a generalist. I have worn many hats, and I've worked in public sector, private sector, for-profit, not-for-profit.
Great. And across those sort of different sets of experiences, do you have any projects or achievements that you think have really stood out to you as some of your sort of crowning achievements or favorites?
So we'll start with achievements, and that is ACE, which I've been part of for 24 years, and the program is only 28 years old. So I was one of the newbies back in the Charlie Thornton's recruits back in the early 1990s. I started as a mentor. I led a mentor team while I was with Morgan Stanley. I was asked onto the board of ACE New York in 2000. I served as chairperson of the National Affiliate Council in the mid-2000s. And through many leadership roles with the local affiliate as well, I've been chairperson of the board for ACE of Greater New York for the last 3 years. ACE is one of the most meaningful things I have ever been part of. In terms of projects, there are two that come to the forefront. 450 Lexington, which was the transformation of a historic landmarked post office building at 45th and Lex here in Manhattan into a 40-story trophy office building. I was with Hines and a construction manager at the time, also with Turner and Skidmore, Owings and Merrill. It was just a wonderful project team and a wonderful experience. Fast forward a few years, probably my marquee project in my career would be 745 7th Avenue, which was purpose-built for Morgan Stanley by the Rockefeller Group with Tishman Construction and Turner Construction, along with KPF, JB&B, Thornton Tomasetti. Hands down the best project team I ever worked with. It was such a strong experience. We actually published a yearbook at the end of it, and we have reunions every 10 years. It was such a great team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's awesome. It seems like a lot of what comes together and draws these sort of experiences together is the aspect of the team. Going back to ACE, I was an A student as well, and the team I remember was great, and I think that makes such a big difference in terms of what makes these experiences stand out. It definitely seems that way in your case as well. Yeah, and I want to ask a little bit more about those projects in terms of 745 versus the redevelopment of the into the office building. What do you think are some of the challenges that you had in redeveloping versus redeveloping and changing an old space into a new space versus sort of the ground up and the purpose-built nature of the second 745 build?
So so many challenges with a repositioning of an asset. First off, it was a landmark building, so dealing with New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission and all the limitations that they put on what we could and could not do to the existing building. That coupled with New York City planning, which is always an arduous pathway. And that building is directly over the east section of Grand Central Station. So there are 15 active railroad tracks directly underneath the building. So one of the biggest challenges from a structural perspective was, how do you build a structure and foundations over an active train shed and then put a 40-story building on top of it? Incredibly complex, a lot of fun. I think contrasting with 745, because it was financial services and owner occupied, a very, very complex building in a very different way. We did have to go through a ULURP, an urban land use review process with city planning. That was, again, a heavy lift, but very successful. And that governed a lot of what we could and could not do with that building as well. So in both cases, a lot of complexities, but the team was able to work through all of them.
Right. Yeah, thank you. So I want to zoom out for a second here and think about the industry and real estate more in general. So I think one thing that might be helpful to sort of dive into is, how do you actually recognize an opportunity when you're looking at real estate? Whether this may be expanding into new geographies, asset classes, or opportunities to redevelop buildings and spaces. What aspects do you look at?
So first and foremost is to realize that you can't look at everything. So we are very strategic. First, from a geographic perspective, we have 5 regional offices. We operate currently in 12 states and are selectively looking to expand the geography. We do operate across several asset classes: light industrial, commercial office, and residential. By design, we are not in healthcare or hospitality, for example. So we stay close to what we know. The third criteria, and we have very strict investment guidelines here at Rockefeller, where there's a very tight range on rate of return. And on the development side, we do not hold. So we acquire develop, stabilize, and sell, which is contrasted with the world I'm in now, Core Holdings, which we built these buildings decades ago and we hold them in perpetuity.
Right. So both the strategy is a little bit different, as well as sort of that hyper focus into core areas and sort of strategic strengths. Yeah. So in terms of change, I think a lot of businesses is adapting to and managing and working through change. And I think that this is a really key area to focus on. So I wanted to get your perspective on any technological progress and change that you've seen sort of from the beginning of your career to the present day, in terms of new technology and in terms of the way that we're looking at data today as opposed to 10, 20 years ago. How do you think that has changed the way firms develop and manage properties?
So I'm actually going to rewind it a little further back than that, and I'm going to show my age. But as an undergraduate, we worked in a mainframe environment with punch cards when I started in Fortran and BASIC. It was pretty horrible. A couple years out of college, I was with Turner, and the department I was in got the first personal computer. At Turner, we were also in a mainframe environment up until that point for scheduling and cost management. So imagine an office with 350 people. There was one personal computer, and it was a dual floppy drive. It didn't even have a hard drive. And we thought this thing was magical. So fast forward a couple days after that, everybody has a personal computer on their desk. Computing power has been revolutionized. The next big thing was the introduction of mobility. So in the late 2000s, by that point, people had migrated to laptops, but it was still a personal computer, but it gave some level of mobility. But in the late 2000s, with the advent of iPhone and other wireless devices, the mobility and freedom that brings to the workforce, and especially in the built environment, what we can do on a job site today is infinitely more detailed and effective than what we did 40 years ago. When I started as a field engineer right out of college, I carried around Turner cards, and they were index cards, and a pen, and I wrote down my notes. And when I got back to the office, those notes were transferred by hand into reports. Today, you're dictating and it's being transcribed real time, or you're out with an iPad and using Bluebeam. It's just a completely different world.
Right. Yeah, it seems like that would definitely have an impact on the pace that you'd be able to source opportunities and complete projects. So it seems like definitely a different world. So in terms of today, one of the biggest challenges I think that we're seeing across every sector and across life in general is the COVID-19 pandemic. So in terms of real estate and in your experience, what challenges has the pandemic caused to the property management business, as well as are there any factors of this pandemic that you think will have a lasting impact and on the way you do business going forward?
So the impact has been enormous. In many ways, it has fundamentally changed the way we operate a building. Everything from temperature scanning and screening people before they enter a building, protocols about masking, ASHRAE guidelines on fresh air exchange and filtration, to social distancing. Some of those things will be short term. Most of those things are here to stay. We also, because we have demonstrated across the country that working remotely actually does work. And I compare this with a couple decades ago when we first got the flexibility, the freedom to work remotely with the first wave of laptops and cell phones. The technology was pretty raw, and people tried working from home and drifted back into the office because it just didn't work. This time around, work from home or working remotely is a fundamental and lasting change. We still have yet to see how that plays out long-term in the workplace, because people still like to be in person. They like to gather. That's how the best mentoring and training and development occurs. Casual collision, meeting people in the office, just can't be replaced in a virtual world. So finding that balance between the two will be one of the lasting effects as well.
Absolutely. So as well, in the past year, I know we've seen some shifts in terms of population, with many people and firms moving from some urban areas to the Sun Belt and other regions within the country. Like you mentioned before, much of Rockefeller's focus is mixed use urban assets. And what opportunities and challenges do you think that this geographic population shift poses to the business? And how do you adapt in general to sort of these larger trends?
So this is just the nature of real estate. Demographic shifts are part of the world. They're always different drivers. And I'll compare it to the 1970s, when big corporations were exiting urban areas, moving to suburban office spaces, and we were building suburban office as fast as we could. Decentralization of residential as well out of urban areas. That choked itself. If you look at Atlanta, Houston, LA, they don't work as cities because of the urban sprawl. So 20 years ago, we started to see the drift back, the re-urbanization that has brought us to where we are today. Now we've got technology and flexibility that allows people to work from anywhere. So we'll see continued ebb and flow in and out of cities, in and out of suburbs. Suburban office vacancies are very high across the country because people are tired of spending 3 hours a day in their car, and there are better ways to balance life and work.
Right, absolutely. Right. And within the last few years, companies, including Rockefeller, have been more focused on sustainability and managing their footprint. And I think this is a really interesting area to look at. So, with your background in design and construction, is this something that's top of mind for you when you're working on projects? And what are some ways that your role has allowed you to further sustainability initiatives and practices?
It is very much top of mind for us. All of our core holdings are LEED certified, and most of our development projects are now LEED certified, and we are also getting well building certifications as well. It's a sustainability development goals are a corporate initiative for us, and that wraps itself into, there's an organization called GRESB, G-R-E-S-B. We now have GRESB certifications on parts of our portfolio as well. And that's all about environment and social governance, social responsibility and good governance. So very, very much a focus. Specific to New York City, and New York State is a leader in conservation and energy use. New York City has very stringent local laws regarding carbon utilization, and the state has very ambitious initiatives under the umbrella of the carbon challenge. So we have staff who focus solely on this topic, and how do we get our buildings in line with new regulations, and going forward, whether it's existing buildings or new development or additional repositionings, how do we make all of these align with our sustainable development goals?
So switching gears a little bit here, you mentioned the ACE community earlier, one which we are both a part of, and I want to sort of drill down a little bit and understand, why do you think that mentorship in general is important?
So I was fortunate enough early on in my career and really all the way through to have wonderful mentors. So men and women that took an interest in me as a human being and what I aspired to, and really were coaches and reference points for me. That led me to being a mentor, to giving back, especially underserved communities. I was very fortunate that I came from a family where everybody had gone to college. My parents were professionals. My grandparents were professionals. That's unusual. And I recognized early on that not everybody had that same circumstance. I grew up in Northeast Pennsylvania, went to a large regional high school where less than 10% of us went to college, much less very competitive universities and colleges. So early on, I understood the distinction and recognized what it meant to give back.
Right. I know you touched on this a little bit in the previous question, but what really led you to be a mentor, and maybe what have you taken away from that experience?
So as I said, it really comes to mentors that I had, and really wanting to emulate that and give back. That's what led me into the ACE program and some of the other things that I do. I work a lot with high school students and college students because those formative years are when you really need the input from people who have the experience. So for me as a mentor, that's very, very important. And then to mentor others to become mentors and share the knowledge.
And in terms of the ACE organization at large, what do you think is its impact both on individuals, companies, the industry? Where do you see ACE's sort of place?
So the whole premise of ACE was to engage underserved communities and people on the fringe and get them into our industry. So when I reflect back to when I started in business in the late 1970s, architecture firms, engineering firms, construction firms, real estate ownership was a bunch of old white men. Not at all reflective of who we are as a nation and a community, but that's the way the business was. And even by extension, tradespeople, bunch of white men. So early on, I realized the importance of diversity and inclusion within the design and construction community and was very committed to that. I was fortunate that my employers were always very, very focused and supportive of it. And ACE really fit the bill for me personally in that initiative to how do we diversify, be more equitable, and be more inclusive in the design and construction world. I think the impact of ACE has been enormous. We've had literally hundreds of thousands of students go through the program in the last 25 years. And many like yourself come back and now you're the mentor. And that's what it's all about.
Right, absolutely. Keeping that impact sort of going. Absolutely, I can definitely understand that. So thinking about people my age, what do you think students and young people in general who are looking to be involved in the industry do to be prepared? And what sort of skills and knowledge do you think going forward will be crucial?
Well, I think first and foremost, this is a people business. It's a very interactive business, even in the virtual world. So whether you're a design engineer or a field engineer, a property manager, you're interacting with dozens of people every day. And at honing your people skills, your communication skills, both verbal and written, are at the top of the list. Most of us had technical educations, so we're very process oriented, very logical in our approach to things, and that carries forward in the business. In terms of preparation for the industry, I would say flexibility and adaptability. You've heard me talk about how things have changed for me over the last 5 decades. That rate of change will continue in the decades going forward, and it will likely accelerate because of technology and other things. So be ready for change, because things don't stay the same.
Right, absolutely. And just finally here, I know you've given us a lot of great tips today. Do you think that there's anything else that you would like to leave young people with who are looking to get a sort of a foothold in the industry?
Absolutely. And I share this if I'm guest lecturing or one-on-one with students, whatever it might be. First and foremost, your career is yours. Nobody's going to get you that first job. Nobody's going to get you promoted. And nobody else but you can figure out what it is you like to do. Why do you jump out of bed in the morning and run off to work? And I hate the term work because it's negative. I'm passionate about what I do. I love this business. And that's part of why I'm so connected to it and to the people within the business. So the last thing I'd leave you with is follow your passions, find what you're most interested in, and that's your career.
Right, focusing on that passion piece.
Absolutely.